Greetings, everyone, and welcome to tonight's conversation. Lots to discuss as it relates to this particular show, so thank you all so much for being part of this conversation. Joshua, we're going to start with you as we launch into this dialogue. You wrote a piece for The Reckoning called In Jerrod Carmichael Reality Show, A Black Comedian Imagines His Queer Identity. And of course, that was at the beginning of the show, right? And you shared a lot of really important insights in that piece. So I want to have you just reflect on that article a bit and then kind of move into, now that you've had time to sit with this show as more episodes have been released, what's kind of happening with your commentary around this today?
Yeah, the first episode was super interesting in terms of being so driven by the Tyler of it all and everybody wanting to react to specifically that conversation, how Tyler had treated Jerrod during that conversation. And so much of it was focused on that. And then there was still this kind of like bubbling conversation around like, he's sucking that white man's toes and he seems like kind of a terrible person. Uh, but because that conversation with Tyler happened, there was also so much just empathy that you can't help but feel for this uh, gay black man who is in love with his best friend and doesn't know how to talk to him about it. That's something that you sort of can't help but empathize towards and feel for him in that situation. And so the first episode was actually the one that I think had the most sort of balanced portrayal of him as a person. And then I think since then, it's almost sort of morphed into like an addiction narrative where, you know, he's addicted to the camera and he's addicted to hookups on Grinder and he's addicted to oversharing and, you know, the taste of white feet or whatever. And because it's now to me an addiction narrative, it kind of operates the same way as one where you do empathize with him and you're like, that's a person who's going through serious stuff, and you know, I wish him all the best, but also it's really getting on my nerves that he keeps making the choices that he's making. This is driving me crazy. I want to like be there for him, but also like not at all, and have him just like not be one of the things that I know about in the world. And that's kind of continued with each episode, and so it's been interesting to watch the progression of the public reaction to the choices that he's making.
I'm curious, gentlemen. What are your reflections? Joshua, I definitely um agree. I was actually, so what's interesting about me taking in this show is I think I mostly watched it backwards for the most part because I think I started at 3 for real. I watched a little bit of 1, but I really started at 3 and kind of went back and then 4 or 5, right? So I absolutely see where you're going. What are some other reactions, thoughts?
So I'll open up early and just say, I don't think we were the target demographic of the show. So I think that despite him being a black gay man, I don't think that it was packaged, pitched, or developed with us as the core audience in mind. And I think a lot of us have experienced black centered media where it does feel that way, where we do feel like that we are reflected. And I also will say too that as I look at some of his comedy specials, a lot of things, his delivery style, his sense of humor, I also will say doesn't align with what we would consider culturally black, with a lot of jokes, with a lot of delivery, a lot of topics. And so I think for him, it's a disconnect on multiple ways. I think for a lot of the black community, the humor style is a little different than what we would go for overall. And obviously, the community isn't a monolith, but we know humor is culturally constructed, though, right? So, like the things that make white communities laugh is very different than the things that make black communities laugh. The things that white gay men cater to in terms of humor is very different than the things that we will cater to or go to in terms of humor. Um, And then the other thing I'll say, and I'll toss it to my colleagues though, is that even though we weren't the demographic in mind, I still think it is important to say that this is a Black queer man operating in this space, because we don't have that very often. And I'm afraid of discredit, and critiquing too far means we'll never get it again.
So who do you think his demographic is? Who is the show for? I mean, I just want to. I mean, we're gonna get real, right? I mean,
okay. Okay. Can I, Charles and can I give my like for real unapologetic answer?
Absolutely, that is what this is.
Yeah, because you listen, campus climate got me feeling on that, so it's gonna. Okay, I think
the views expressed may not necessarily represent.
Disclaimer.
That's what.
Progressive.
So you're saying he's talking to white people. He's talking to white gay people, and he's talking to white audiences.
White gay men, and I think white progressive women, because I don't think some of the things that he's showcasing or unveiling is new to us either. That's the other reason why I don't think this is catered for us.
But Tyler, the creator, notwithstanding.
Well, I think the interesting thing about Tyler's audience is I think Tyler, even as a rapper, I think Tyler's audience is mostly non-Black.
He's got some feedback on that.
Yeah, so I actually agree with kind of where Deion is leaning. More than that though, if and I don't want to take up too much space in this, but more than that, I actually think the disconnect that I have with this show is it's a lot of revealing. I know too much. It's actually too much information being shared. Now, on one hand, I think this is very interesting reality television. I think it's a well-made reality TV show, and it does feel very real. I don't want to know it, though. So I think that's another piece of this as well.
So I'm curious. I mean, like, that's the point of reality TV, right? Is like knowing too much and like letting somebody into the intimate details of your life and letting people see what. I mean, it's right there in the name, like reality TV, right? I mean,
and reality TV is fake. That's the point. Like, reality TV isn't real. Like, it's
not real. But I mean, in theory, at least, you're getting access where nobody else does. You're getting access to this one person's life. I mean, yeah, it's highly scripted. The show is very slick. It's very well produced. It's very glossy, and it's got a nice sheen to it, right? Which a lot of reality TV doesn't necessarily have. So you can tell that it was, the craft is very much. The craft is at a reasonably high level. But I guess my question is, what's the point, right? If we're talking about, something that leaves Black gay men cold, what's the point? I mean, especially if, he's not talking to any particular audience that we would engage in. I mean, what's the point? And why has it gotten so much feedback? And why is it talked about? I mean, I was listening and to the point about, your point, Deion, about his comedy like not being very funny. I saw this video of him on the Breakfast Club. And he's saying that he and Chappelle are artists. They're not comedians per se, but they're artists, and they're trying to elevate the comedy and take it to different places because he's very consistent that comedy is a dying art. And that Black comedians are dying. And in his show, he is attempting to let you in on what makes his comedy. And there's also a fair amount of, I mean, I totally get the cringe factor, but the critique is that that's his brand, right? That his brand is cringe comedy. His brand is not the belly laughs, but the kind of and that jokes will kind of linger in the air to make people feel uncomfortable. I mean, I don't know if that's accurate read, but that's the read that I'm getting.
If I could jump in for just a second, sort of in response to Deion and Joe, the interesting thing as far as people's reactions is that the show kind of presupposes that people's entryway into Jerrod is his stand-up, and for most people that's not the case. It's the sitcom, which is drawn from this like Norman Lear sort of tradition of the socially conscious, the sitcom that takes on the issues of the day and is topical, and it was also very black. Like when you look at the rest of the cast, you got David Allen Greer and Loretta Devine, Tiffany Haddish, Lil Rel. Now he's also straight in that show, so obviously it's not autobiographical in any real way. But I do think that uh, him coming from that show in particular, I think led people to believe that that sort of indeed, like from a black perspective, topicality, talking about issues, kind of confronting uh, golden calves in this way was a way that people thought about him prior to watching the show, and then being sort of shocked by like, oh, like it's not just about the fact that you don't have a girlfriend. Like that's not who you were at all in the Carmichael show.
It's a bait and switch, is what you're saying.
Well, let's talk about that. Do you think that, so if we're assessing him not like as a stand-up comic in the traditional sense, but as a sort of performance artist, or dare I even say a shock artist, how well would we even how would we rate him even by those standards? Like if we say, we're putting him in conversations as a kind of performance artist, if you will, does he succeed? Does the show, and does he succeed even based on that?
I've always been of the school of if art doesn't make you love it or hate it, it's not really art. And so I happen to enjoy his comedy. I think it's very cerebral. I think you have to kind of ingest it in a different kind of way to really have it resonate with you. But I enjoy it. I definitely think reality show is in quotes when we're talking about this show. He's a writer. He knows what people want to see. He knows that Black people are somewhat interested in him, even if tangentially so, because we've seen that one special, or maybe we saw the sitcom in the past, but we don't really know him like that. And so I think the Tyler play in the very first episode, and realize that came in the very first episode, as well as the sucking toes came in the very first episode. That's, as an executive or as somebody running the show, yes, I need the most shocking thing to happen in the first episode so that everybody can talk about it, including Black people who probably want nothing more to do with the rest of the series, to be honest. I haven't heard very much conversation from my crew or anybody that I know about episodes 2, 3, 4, and I think we're on 5 at this point. I've watched them all. No one's talking about those episodes because there's no bait there. Tyler was the bait, and the white toe sucking was the bait in the first episode. And now we're in a place where he is talking about his family, and he is talking about his sexuality, and he is talking about being a serial cheater. Things that, maybe some people can relate to, maybe some people can't, but they're not tuned in. Because it's not salacious and it's not the same stuff that we signed on for. But I think he knew that. I think he knew that there was going to be more to the show, but he needed a bait. He needed something to hook us with in the first episode, and I think he accomplished that.
But so these are great points, but there has to be someone's watching it, right? So it's like there has to be a huge portion of people somewhere that is consuming the show, or desiring or having conversations. Because, and I want to be clear, I agree with you, he's a brilliant writer, because I found his sitcom show exponentially funnier than his stand-up. I think it's his delivery for me that I'm not the biggest fan of. Because I agree, I think the Carmichael show I loved, but yeah, I just think that for me, that I lost my train of thought. My bad.
You were talking about somebody's watching. Somebody's watching.
Oh yeah. So that's why I think at the beginning, and Joe, when you said like, what's the point? So as I think about this, and if I analyze this, right, it's the same. Similarly, it's the same way that I talk to people about RuPaul's Drag Race, right? There are huge systemic problems with RuPaul's Drag Race. That is a fact. Okay. It is also a fact that RuPaul is the most famous drag queen in the world and revolutionized drag and put it on a platform as art. That is also a fact. I think the same thing about Jerrod, right? I think that it is okay if it does not reflect my sense of humor or my fringe group, right? May not be the circles that I would interact with, but that doesn't mean that I negate why it's important, because someone that reflects someone's experience, right? So
Do you think
go ahead, Charles.
do you think race play is funny?
Absolutely not. But there are black men that do.
But I mean, is it funny? Is it like a comic? Like, because that was part of his shtick. I mean, I think in the first episode when he's doing his stand up thing, he's like, and he's doing his confessional comedy thing. He asked the audience, is like, he's talking about all the things that he wants to explore, and he asked, "Have y'all ever done something to the effect of Have you ever done race play?" Which it stops there. I don't know what happens after that, but and then in the second episode, I think he has on the scent or something, or maybe the guy that he's with has the scent. He's like,
Yeah.
that smells like what Martin Luther King would
Martin
probably
Luther King.
smell like. And it was such a
Ugh.
strange kind of joke, and they laughed about it. And he went on and on about how Martin Luther King probably smelled as he was. Again, that's what we saw. So I was just curious, like, is race play funny?
So I just wanted to clarify real quickly that all of those things took place in the same episode.
Okay.
The is anybody here into race play comment was sort of within maybe like the first 2 minutes of the episode. And the controversial, I like to pretend that he's the slave master's son teaching me to read surreptitiously by candlelight. All of that came in the same episode. And the race play comment and the slave master's son jokes were kind of like bookends of that episode. And I thought it was super interesting to see his reaction on The Breakfast Club to, when you're filming that much, when you're shooting that much raw footage, you're making very deliberate choices about what you're shaping it into. And so for him to shape it into that and then be mad that people reacted the way they reacted, I thought was absurd.
Can I chime in on something though too? Because I just want to be clear, is that when it comes to sense of humor, Black people often over time have had a history of laughing at outrageous and offensive things, right? So if you think of some of the greatest stand-up comics of all time, we as gay men can think about things back, Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, that were still hilarious jokes. Homophobic, yes, still hilarious. So I want to be clear. Those two things can coexist. One of my favorite shows of all time is Veep on HBO. They lit everybody up on that show. Nobody was safe. Everybody got equally insulted. So I think that you can write good, offensive, or shock comedy. For me, he isn't doing that. I think that's what I want to be clear about. That it is not being done well, in my opinion.
I do think there's also the back to the question of who is this for. It comes through very strongly, at least the notion, because one thing that I find interesting about the show is that you never see any audience. It's not any sort of traditional stand-up in terms of that you get to see an audience reaction. You get to see people kind of yelling things in sort of dialogue with him, but you never see what the actual audience is. Nonetheless, you get the impression that these are almost exclusively white audiences. And so when you ask the question, is race play funny? Who's the race play joke being told to? And that's going to inform my answer. If you're telling me that you're asking a room full of white people if they're into race play and that's the dialogue that you're having with them, that makes me super uncomfortable.
Which supposedly, according to him, was the point. I mean, to make people super uncomfortable. But the other thing that's interesting about that is, if you're telling that to a white audience, it's going to land differently than it does to a Black audience, right? I mean, I can imagine a scenario where a Black audience might think that's funny. I mean, offensive on some level, but like funny.
Well, I kind of wonder though, like, I wonder context, right? So if it's a Black dude, if it's a Black heterosexual man talking about that in the context of a white woman, does that land differently than a Black man talking about that in the context of a white man?
in front of a black audience.
In front of a black audience, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I
In
think
other words, what is there? Is it? I mean, and I'm not defending by any means, but I do wonder if the object of let's say the race play, I don't know,
the race play-
collaborator, it doesn't make a difference if it's a white man versus a white woman
I
in
don't
the
know.
context of a joke. Just curious.
I tend to think no.
Okay.
I mean, I think that the whole situation is an absurd one, right? Where you're imagining oppression, right, and playing oppression for laughs. And to me, the absurdity of that is not trumped by the absurdity of it being a same-sex relationship, right? That I think it's equally either as funny or as offensive with a man as it would be with a woman. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that the entire setup and what he was arguing on the Breakfast Club was that the entire setup has to be viewed in context. That a lot of people latched onto the punchline, but weren't down with the setup, and that once you hear both of them in context, in his mind, it's very funny and it's pushing comedy in a different direction. But I mean, I think that either you like it or you don't, and I think it's either you find it funny or you don't. And I think that's probably where all of this lands, right? Some people think he's absolutely hilarious. Other people think he's like, oh.
I think where I miss with it is that it feels so clinical and almost ethnographic. Like if it were more surreal, like let's say if it was completely absurdist comedy, right? Which is what I think he thinks he might be doing.
Mm-hmm.
If it was absurdist, maybe I could kind of stretch my imagination to see the humor, but because it's so confessional and the way, for example, we haven't talked about his family, but the way his family's presented to us, and even Jamar's family in episode 5, it doesn't to me read as surreal or absurd or even satirical. It reads as not just documentary, but clinical, almost ethnographic. Like, let's make fun of the black people because we're so enlightened. And I don't know if it's more like we're supposed to be in on the joke with him, or because in some ways it almost feels like the scene. I know, Johnnie, the episode his father really touched you. We were talking about that, but it was like I don't know what to do with this.
To that point, this has been interesting too to unpack because I didn't know that this was going to happen. I didn't realize until we got to the friend episode in episode 3 that a lot of the folks in his world are black folks. So it's interesting kind of watching people that are close to him or that he considers close are black people. I did not know that was going to be the case.
You thought it would be the opposite.
I didn't know what I thought, but in my mind, I guess I was like, oh, he probably has like a big circle of white friends, right? Mm-hmm. And realizing oh, that's not the case, actually. He just seems like he universally treats the people in his life really terribly. And my challenge with, I think, all of it is he's unlikable in the show. So I think going back to that conversation about who this is for, I'm not sure what he was trying to present, but I just don't like him.
But that may be purposeful. But this even goes back to what Joe said. So when it's making people uncomfortable, black people don't need to be made uncomfortable about racism, which is again why I just don't think it's us in mind as the key demographic. And then I will say, because I feel like I have been harping on him, but I do want to say I would give him his flowers, because I think it's impossible to critique, but also say that it's a good thing that you're occupying this space. I also want to say that I appreciate having a public story of someone coming out later. Because I think so much, especially now, there's still a narrative of a timeline, or you expect it to come out teenage years early. And I just love that this is giving a new type of narrative of when people come out. And I also would just say, for us, if we if possible, to take off our lens as black queer men, what would be our reaction to the show if we were not of that identity, right? So if you turn to watch other things, if this were, let's say, a white lesbian in the Midwest, whatever it is, right? would we be learning from that, even though it's not perfect? And I think that's my thing. Is like, is this sparking similar conversations in the circles that it was developed in mind? That they
Well,
are.
that's part of why we wanted to have Joe on the call. So I was like, Joe being a heterosexual brother, I was curious to see how he would relate to the show. But it's also interesting. I rewatched the Cat Williams interview he did on B103 a few years ago, and he talked about Jerrod Carmichael then saying that, yeah, he was not complimentary of his comedy, which I kind of makes me wonder. Now, I know we talked about the audience, but I also am curious about what his peers, especially other Black comedians, what do they make of him?
Well, that's interesting because when you were talking about like Johnnie, about how you just don't like him, the thought came to, and everybody made much about the Larry David show and about Seinfeld, where those characters were deliberately designed to be unlikable, right? But at some point, people still thought it was really funny and very hilarious because you watch these unlikable people get their comeuppance, right? In the end, they were squabbling over really petty stuff. They were squabbling over different things, and somehow they always got, hoisted on their own arrogance or on their own self-importance. And I think that in this way, there's that setup, but there's no payoff. Right.
Joe, you have hit the nail on the head. I actually thought about that. That's the challenge with the way the show is set up as a reality show, is it's like, I don't have any way to know that there's going to be a resolution around the way you're behaving. All I know right now is that you're rich and that you treat people horribly and consistently. Now, I will say this last episode was a little bit of a bright light, the episode with Jamar. And Joshua, I know you have some insight there. But I want to bring Akeem in too, because I'm curious to know, like, in terms of the way the show is being presented and Jerrod himself, any thoughts there?
Well, one thing to note, and we were talking about the fact that he is surrounded by all of these Black people. All of these Black people are his day ones. It seems kind of like the higher his star rises, he is surrounding himself with a more diverse set of people. And so Jamar is a product of kind of almost that day oneness, which is why I think that story resonates with you. But I'd be very much so interested. The evolution of this series has probably been the most interesting thing to me. In how he's kind of chosen to tell some of these stories. I did not like the best friend episode. I felt like it was kind of exploitive. I felt bad for her, really and truly, and for that to be his day one best friend, I was like, I don't get it. But I also feel like this show is almost like a humiliation ritual. Follow me here. He's naked pretty much almost the entire first episode. Just him in his drawers in the bathroom, him in his drawers getting dressed, him in his drawers in the car. Like, I don't, and the cover image on Max is him in those white briefs. And I just feel like that's not necessarily flattering, maybe to some people, but it seems kind of humiliating to me. And he kind of takes everybody around him on this humiliation trip.
Mm-hmm.
Like the boyfriend, he's humiliating him by cheating on him right there in front of everybody continuously. The best friend, he humiliates her right there on camera. And Jamar, I mean, he's kind of redeemed at the end of his story, but he sucks. As a comedian in the very beginning, his jokes don't land. It's awkward. It's crazy. And he takes on this role where he's trying to coach him. But a lot of those jokes are just humiliation. And so it is kind of hard to watch, that humiliation kind of play out with everybody around him, but he gives it out equally.
See, I kind of wonder, me and Johnnie were talking about this earlier. I was like, it kind of reminded me in some ways of Girls. Like, it kind of reminded me of Lena Dunham, like that first, like in terms of the sort of in your face. But I do find that, I think the humiliation ritual perspective is fascinating. Thank you. That's fascinating.
One thing that's interesting about that aspect of it is if you rewatch the first episode, within maybe the first 5 minutes, he's having a conversation with his anonymized friend who ends up going to the Emmys with him in the mask, who is telling him, it's one thing to be public, but is this masturbatorily public is what he says. And you continually see people having these conversations around him like, does a camera need to be here? Is this something that needs to be captured? And I think that to me is evidence that he has kind of misjudged the degree to which the public and the private needs to intersect for the purpose of this show. It doesn't seem like the people around him are responding favorably to the way he's documenting his life. Obviously, the way he's edited together makes him look is very unflattering. I'm sure he has Final Cut on every episode. And so these are definitely the parts of him that he wants us to see. And it's interesting to me that even the people around him, the people closest to him, are like, is this necessarily the image of yourself that you want to put forth? And over it appears that the answer is yes.
So you thought he was going to get the HBO deal if he kept his clothes on? Is that what you thought? Like you thought he was going to get the HBO deal if he didn't?
I think he would have.
I might have took him off to get the show.
Maybe. I mean, who knows? Who knows?
I think the why is just about the commerce of it, because the special that he did, where he kind of established this confrontational sort of therapy like presentation to his comedy, is the thing that put him on the map, is the thing that got him the Emmy. He hosted Saturday Night Live when he was promoting that. Next thing you know, he's hosting the Golden Globes.
But you know what the thread is, though? The director is the thread. The director of the reality show was also the director of the Golden Globes and was also director of the I looked it up on because I was like, oh, so it's like the director is like the thread, like the director directed all the things. So I wonder if that also plays a part.
I think it's mostly just the fact that this is the thing that hit. In the article, I sort of compared what he does to Lauryn Hill Unplugged. And if you can imagine, if Lauryn Hill Unplugged was like a huge hit and was a #1 record and everybody was rushing out to buy it, everything she did after that would be like, okay, and here's another song about this Bible verse that means, you know what I'm saying? It would just be people, even when they don't realize they're doing it, have the Hollywood attitude of, if it makes money, make more. And when he said, oh yeah, like people seeing me break down on stage is apparently the thing, like, do you guys want some more of that?
And so this is what I want, because I want to give an alternate way, I think, of viewing all of the close off, because I agree with a lot of what is shared, but I think that there is an argument to be made for the opposite, right? So if we think about where he's at in his queer journey, and let's say he's just recently accepted that he is queer, in his mind, or in some people's mind, being in underwear, being willing to be shirtless, being willing to be that vulnerable with your sexuality is radical, right? It's the first time that you're publicly embracing your sexuality, sensuality, intimacy in a public forum. And so I think that there could be an argument to be made that it's also an unapologetic embrace of him being gay on a screen, and that we don't have a lot of that, right? So like, we don't have a lot of unfiltered footage of Black queer men volunteering to...
Not when HBO gave us Oz. We've been seeing Black queers on HBO since at least 1997. And not in the name of Adabisi and the cast of Oz, I have to condemn that statement.
I personally could have done without the image of him with the toe in his mouth. I didn't need that one.
Okay, but would you be opposed if it was a Black person? If he was sucking on a Black man's toes on camera?
No.
Right. So I think that's so this is what I could think. I think people could make the argument, though, that even it's radical, right? He could say that I'm willing to showcase my unapologetic approach to love or whatever on screen.
Yeah, I love you. Jerrod is not on HBO because he's radical. I think he is establishment. He's like, I'm doing whatever it takes. Yes. As a matter of fact, I mean, when he was pitching the show to HBO, he probably had a list of things that he'd be willing to do, and that's probably why they put him on. it's not a. It's like the show may have merits being radical. I don't even think it's that sex positive. I think it's just in a weird way. It's kind of like what homophobic black straight men think that black gay men are. Like it's like exactly.
So wait a minute. You don't think it's sex positive?
No,
Tell me why.
I think it's not sex positive because it's. I mean, it's not really advancing any like narrative of pleasure, or it doesn't seem affirming of sexuality. I mean, he himself grapples with whether he has a sex addiction. So that's
Right.
Joshua pointed out. I mean, I think it's sex positive only if we understand sex positivity as being about the consumption of bodies. So I mean, if he's like, I mean, you see him like ordering dates, like he orders like plane tickets and Uber Eats. Sure.
So you're saying there's a certain level of emotional detachment.
I think it's capitalism at its most vulgar. Like I think it's absolutely capitalism. I mean, I don't think representations of sex in and of itself is sex positive. I mean, I think that not in 2024.
No, and I absolutely agree with that, because I think his depictions of sex are kind of what are par for the course. Like we've seen versions of what Jerrod Carmichael is doing in film over the course of history. I think the difference with what he's doing is it happens to be reality show, and it's this celebrity who's opening himself up to talk about his experiences in this way. But I don't think it is any different than any other depictions of sex that we've seen. I think what would have been radical is some of that emotional attachment, is some of these other conversations. If they had dove more into, if he was trying to dive into the why in the show more, it's kind of been hinted at so far, in that people are wondering if I have a sex addiction and whatever. I don't know where they're going to go with that, if anywhere at all. Maybe something will come out of it, but as of right now, it's not different than anything else we've seen.
Can I push back? I'm gonna push back though, y'all. I agree. I agree. I want to be clear. But where else is this type of story or narrative centered or being told in a public in Hollywood?
With a black man.
1 out of every 10 OnlyFans account. I mean, you mean like in mainstream?
Well, no, yeah, that's what. Exactly. But that's what
I feel like every other Netflix series has a black man dating a white man. Like I mean, that's not radical. Like how many?
That's not what I'm saying is radical. I'm saying the unapologetic embracing of your sexuality and willing to film it and show it to the public. Now, capitalistic.
I do understand the argument of like the fact that he's exposing himself this way is sort of it feels brave and it feels daring, and it's interesting just because you haven't seen anything like it before. But in the way he treats sex and nudity in particular, to me, it's more of a performance to make you feel like, well, if he's willing to show that, then this is a real reality show. Why would he show me sucking on why would he show me sucking on these white toes unless he's like really going there and trying to represent himself as really as possible, as if there's not so much artifice going on behind the scenes.
Well, let's talk about the boldness. I mean, he's not fully nude at all. So, I mean, even if the merit is, oh, look how I mean, he doesn't do full frontal. I'm not saying he should. I'm just saying, like, I mean, if you're going to be bold, be bold. Like, we don't actually see that. We just see him in underwear. So I feel like even in a sense, there's still a level of like, oh, I'm gonna put a toe out, but I'm not, so to speak, right? But I'm not gonna go. Because I think now that would have been, now that might have been, I mean, one could argue that that's radical for him to completely display his body. And got to give a shout out to Eric Andre. You want to talk about radical comedians that are really pushing something, that are really advancing something? I mean, look at Uncle Eric Andre. Like, he needs to, I mean, that's because he does. I mean, he's like, there's just, I mean, you just can't even deny it. Like,
I'm glad you brought up Eric Andre, because in the Jamar episode, when I saw the comedy that Jamar was doing, Eric Andre is who I thought about. I thought about him doing what he was doing in sort of an Eric Andre sort of vein. And what I hated so much about that episode is him building the narrative of basically, I had to teach Jamar how to do real comedy that's important to people and moves people, because what he's doing now just ain't it. And the way it was edited in particular, he was very clear. I was telling Johnnie and Charles, Jamar had an interview with Vulture where he made very clear that the way the whole situation was set up and edited was to make it look like he didn't know how to get laughs until Jerrod agreed to take him under his wing and put him through this, emotional therapy boot camp until he could finally realize how to like expose himself, and that all this trauma that he went through is like the real comedy that he needs to be doing. I hated that. I think that what he's doing is the way he wants to do comedy, and the fact that it was almost like this instructive, I'm gonna make you do a seminar to teach you how to do the real comedy that I've been doing. That enraged me.
Do you think that this show harms or helps images of Black men in Hollywood?
Neither. I don't think it really has any effect. I mean, I do think that because of the way he's presented himself, everybody is clear that this is just who this person is. I don't know that anybody is looking at Jerrod Carmichael and being like, oh, he's a this type of person, he's a that type. I don't think that. I don't know if that person exists in public.
I'm gonna disagree and go the total opposite direction and say both. Because there are people out there that are naive and they'll see him on screen and they'll think that all Black queer men are on Grindr looking for dates all day long. They're gonna think that. They're gonna think everybody's over sexualized. They're gonna think that Black men ain't shit because they'll miss your wedding, or they'll put your best friend on blast, that whole thing. And the one thing that I think we haven't touched on yet is the white boyfriend, and how that may or may not have affected his ascent. Like, there is this discussion that is going on about why is it that every time a Black man gets some shred of success in the entertainment industry, they have to attach themselves to a white person to do it, whether that's romantically, it just is what it is. I think that the industry is full of leaders who are white. And so you kind of have to get through them as gatekeepers. And we're not in positions of power ourselves in order to let people in. Not saying no one is, because we do have people, but some of them are under indictment and have all.
So you're basically saying that the white man helps him pick the lock. That having a white man on his arm is like the code. It's like the cracking the code. It's the cheat code.
And then when we have people that are out there that are buying up media companies, they don't stay up there very long.
To be fair, he did want to take Tyler to the Emmys, so you got to give him his credit. You got to give him his credit for that.
I don't think any of that was real. I personally do not think that the Tyler. No, I just don't see how that happens, and then he follows it up with everything else that we saw.
Well, okay, so this is really interesting. Oh, we are okay. First of all, Charles, I think to go back to Charles's question, I don't think this show has any effect, mainly because I don't think, to Deion's earlier point, I don't think enough people are tuning into it for it to have any sort of grand effect. I think it will only really affect Jerrod's career and what Jerrod wants to do. Like, I think it'll have an impact on him.
I'm a young black man. I'm a Black boy, 15 years old, and I'm on HBO, and I'm flipping around. I'm looking at HBO Max, and I come across some. I'm 15. I'm having some feelings. I'm not quite sure what I think about identity and stuff, and I tune in. That won't have any. I'm not weighing one or another, but I'm like, let's say for a young brother, like what is one thing? And it's not a judgment. I'm not doing will we please think of the children. I'm not doing that, but I'm curious.
No, that I think
if I was 15 or 16 and I watched this, what would I think? Would I like it? Would I not like it? I don't know.
It depends on what kind of 15-year-old you are. I mean,
I think so.
If you're like, no, I'm serious. I mean, if you're like the weirdo outside, okay, and you're trying to figure stuff out, and you don't know what, and you are having, you will probably attach this show mainly because of your outsider status, right? And mainly because there's a lot of pain on the screen that, at least in theory, that could reflect, or you could embrace and get your arm around and say, yeah, I totally get that. I mean, but I think that part of this whole thing is that a lot of it, at least what we're talking about, a lot of it, we're not really sure if it's artifice. We're not really sure if it's for real. I mean, some of us think it's totally for real, and Alston and others think it's like not even close to being good, right? But there are two undeniable facts, right? The first undeniable fact is that it is happening, right? And that you are seeing at least a facsimile of an authentic, dare I say, queer experience on screen. I mean, theoretically, it's authentic, right? And the second thing is happening is that it's representation, even if we don't like it, right? Even if we don't like it, and that's kind of to Deion's point. It's like, even if we don't like it, it's there, right? And in theory, at least in the big, broad atmosphere, this could be influential to someone.
Right? To be fair, HBO does also have a very well-crafted Lil Nas X documentary that if you watch the Carmichael show and let it play, they will recommend it to you. They will say, do you want to watch this documentary about Lil Nas X? Well, so it's not a thing that doesn't exist at all.
And HBO,
no, it doesn't exist at all. But you have to find that. You have to seek it out, right? You have to. I mean, in theory, I mean, we know about the Carmichael show. I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing about the Nas X doc, right? It's not been getting a lot of pub. I don't recall reading any reviews or seeing.
It's mostly because it's not enraging people. I think that this, in many ways, this show is equivalent to the viral video of the woman putting spaghetti and meatballs all over her counter. Like, the whole point of it is that you're supposed to be enraged by it, and that's what fuels the engagement.
And can I just real quick,
please,
just add? I'll be less than 30 seconds. So I think, Charles, the first question that you said, I just think teenagers and kids now are just fundamentally growing up in a very different world than we are. So there's no world where I believe that a child's only ability to get a narrative of a Black queer man is on HBO. I also think, back to Joe's point, though, if I am a kind of outside Black queer man with eclectic likes, and maybe I like white men, I do feel represented in the show. It does open doors for me. I think a lot of the issue has been, is what Akeem said, is that for a lot of us as Black queer men, and what you said, Charles, we've seen that narrative reflected in Hollywood before. We've seen that story be told before, right? Like, we don't seem to need more narratives of the quirky outsider Black gay kid that has a white partner to help him navigate the world, find his sexuality. That's not the narrative that we lack. We lack an unapologetic, like, story of Black queerness that centers Black queer identity throughout, without having to deal with whiteness. And I think that's what a lot of our issue is.
A really very quick pushback to the pushback, right? We've seen dozens of sitcoms focused on, suburban housewives. How many is too many, right? I mean, somebody told me that the definition of mediocrity is if you get more than one thing, right, representing your people, right? If there's more than one Black head coach in the NBA, then that Black head coach gets fired because his team doesn't go anywhere, and they hire another Black head coach. I mean, is that the definition of progress? Is mediocrity, or being able to achieve mediocrity, progress, right? That we can have a show that sucks and it's still on the air, and we can get another show that sucks or that's better or whatever, and it's still as part of the continuum. I mean, I sort of wonder if that's a significant point to raise here. That if nobody likes it, but it's still happening.
This is going to get nominated for an Emmy. We don't like it.
Doesn't matter.
Well,
right?
And I think the other thing here too, I think that when I watch the Carmichael reality show, it reminds me of the Real Friends of West Hollywood. Remember the MTV show that had 6 episodes? They were already shot. People hated, like, they hated it before it aired, and then when it aired, it was like, oh, this really is legitimately awful. I don't like this show. It aired for its 6 episodes, never to return again, right? So I also think we're in this moment in time where shows get pre-recorded, especially reality shows. They're in the can already. So no matter what, this show was done, it was edited, it was going to air. The only thing that would have taken it off the air is some other huge controversy that Jerrod would have had to get into that would have stopped that train. So this show was going to happen regardless. No matter, listen, it's like we paid for it, we're going to put it up. We don't have to bring it back.
I think Joe's point is that Black progress means that we can finally be mediocre. What do you mean that we have to be excellent? That's like for the civil rights. This is like
Black excellence is overrated.
Like now we can just be mediocre. We finally made it. We can just be regular. We ain't gotta be.
We've achieved the dream.
I just want to say really quickly back to the conversation about representation. As storytelling, for me to identify with a story or feel like I'm seeing myself in a story, if it has to be based on the fact that the person is the same race as me, is the same sexuality as me, and those are the only things that I can look into the story and say, oh, like that's something that feels true, that's something that feels accurate to my life, you're just not telling the story right.
That I agree with you on, and I think that gets to Joe's what's the point, and back to what Johnnie is saying, like a redemption arc, right? Like we all know what it's like to be misunderstood. We all know what it's like to miss events. We all know what it's like to be busy, but I don't think he's getting to the root of the humanity of it.
Can we talk about the anti-identification? And I don't know. When he was talking to his father about what a twink was and what a bear was and what an otter was, and then he told his dad that he told his daddy his dad might be a daddy. I can't even imagine. I was like, I literally could not even imagine having that.
I stopped watching for a second. The moment he pulled out the phone and was like, here he is, and the dad looks at him, I literally stopped and went to get coffee because I'm like, what you're not going to do, sir? Why would you do I was like, I see what you're doing, and why are you like this?
Johnnie, you're just doing respectability politics.
I am not. Johnnie Kornegay does not even do that. It's just like,
what do you mean he can't show his dad the picture of his naked boyfriend?
He did to his dad what he did to the rest of us with this show.
That's what I was going to say. So I don't think it's odd for like someone to talk to I think it's like amazing to see a Black queer man and their father have a discussion about sexuality. Our issue is that his father was clearly uncomfortable with the level of the conversation and he pushed the boundaries too far. That is the type of thing that I do think it's toxic. So like, I think if we're talking about like subject matter, that sort of thing is a textbook example of, well, this is not a good representation because this is an example of a narrative that people are going to take and then spin however way, because it was just so uncomfortable. I'm like, your father is wanting to get out of this conversation in every which way, and you have no social awareness or care, either or no awareness or desire to disengage.
He seemed far more comfortable talking about Jerrod's boyfriend than he did talking about his own infidelity. And I think that, it was an echo of the Jamar episode where it's not so much that I want to be naked on camera. I want to reveal these things to myself. I think everybody should want to reveal these things to themselves. My dad should want to get on camera and talk about his infidelity. Jamar should want to get in front of an audience and talk about growing up in foster care. You can't prescribe that sort of presentation to the other people in your life and expect them to be cool with it.
I'm going to say, in terms of arc of the story, this might be hokey. Don't hate me. I did kind of like when in the beginning of the episode, Jamar thought flying a kite was gay, and he went and do it, and at the end, he got him to fly the kite, or at least try.
I love kites.
I thought it was. I kind of liked it. I thought that was some good.
It was heartwarming. Like the guy.
It was absolutely heartwarming to watch. I enjoyed that part. It made me smile. I'm like, listen.
And then he said he didn't have, because Jamar taught himself how to swim, because he didn't have He was like, "Oh,
and they did the joke about, well, you're your dad, and that's why your mom won't tell you.
See, I didn't.
I I thought that was a funny bit. Actually, I was
laugh.
like, that was a funny bit. You should do more things like that.
It was like
So the show does have some redeeming qualities after all. I mean, it's not absolute. It's a little.
I'm ambivalent about the show. I'm sure Jerrod is a very, very wonderful brother. I don't know him personally. I'm sure he's cool.
I don't know if that's correct, but
I'm not convinced.
I'm not convinced he's cool. I'm Jerrod. Oh, bruh. It's a lot. He does a lot to us. But I do want to be mindful of time. Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much for being part of this. I want to definitely get some finals. I would be curious. We have 3 more at the taping of this. We have 3 more episodes to go. Joshua, do we know anything about the future episodes? Have you heard anything, read anything about what's coming? I know the mom is coming. We haven't gotten to the mom stuff yet, so that's a big deal. Anything else that you know of?
I'm not actually sure. HBO's been kind of cagey about even releasing like episode titles or descriptions until almost right before the air. I don't know if that's because they are still sort of cutting it together at the last minute, or if there's something else at play strategy wise, but I actually don't know much about what's coming. I know I'll be watching it because I hate watching it like so many people.
Mission accomplished. We got hate viewers.
Right. Any other final thoughts, y'all, before we head out?
I think I more have a final question, which is, what if we were in the writer's room? How would we, like, if we have questions about how the show is being shaped, and we could be in his ear, what would we tell him? Like, what advice would we give him about how we think the show should go? That's all. It's like kind of a question, I guess.
I think I would tell him to say less words, probably. It's too many words that you're saying, and it's just too many. When he went on the Breakfast Club and said, the people I'm getting the most negative pushback from are black gay men and white racists, and that this was the show that brought those two warring factions together. I just was like, that's you're missing it. You're not understanding what people are reacting to. It doesn't seem like you understand what the feedback you're getting or what people are trying to say. So more than anything, I think he needs to go maybe to double the therapy sessions. Maybe he can take some of Jamar's leftover sessions and just kind of double up Tuesdays and Thursdays.
I don't know, Josh. Yours is less words. Mine is less toes. Just a few less.
Akeem with the hot take.
That's never bad advice.
I would say I would ask him who was the audience and did he consider the impact this would have on Black queer men as much as he considered how it would be consumed and representative of other people, would be my question to him.
I would also say less toes. I mean, never bad advice. And I would just kind of wonder. I would just kind of encourage him to think about, A, redemption arc if there is one, right, and B, give the audience something to hang on to as far as like hope, that you're going to become a better person, that that the cringe factor will be dialed down just a little bit, and then we would see more humanity.
I know the episode. Well, one, I want to say that though respect your views, we also want to affirm the foot fetish community. So the foot fetish community that may be watching, we see.
Don't come after me. I don't want y'all to kick my ass.
Give that man a raise. The episode I want to see. The episode that I want to see. Jerrod and myself, or maybe someone from the CMP universe, they walk into an empty theater, and on the screen is Tongues Untied. And they watch it together. The Marlon Riggs film Tongues Untied, and they watch it together. And then after the film is over, they go to a diner, and they discuss the film. And they start talking about and unpacking all the things. That's the episode that I want to see.
I think that should be pitched as like a real thing. That could be kind of a tack on something. Yeah, That's a great idea. Thank you all so much for being willing to share this evening and talk about Jerrod Carmichael reality show. I think we'll have a lot more as the show goes on, but this has been a great discussion. Thank you all so much for taking the time, y'all.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.